could robots kill? Well, the UN is currently being urged to ban weapons that can cause fatal harm without human control. So how likely is this? And how prepared are we for what could be a lethal development in artificial intelligence? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Divya Gopalan. Killer robots. Well, that sounds like the name of a science fiction movie, but they could become a reality, and soon. Scientists say artificial intelligence has developed so quickly that we could be seeing weapons that can choose a target and kill without a human controlling it. The UN has held 5 days of talks in Geneva on banning what are known as lethal autonomous weapons. But the US, Russia, Israel, and the UK are against any restrictions, saying these developments could make war safer. We'll be bringing our guests in just a moment, but first, here's the Science and Technology editor, Mariarosaria.
What we have here is our primary test facility, robots driving around.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week, robots roam here, being tested to deliver, discover, to do what they're programmed to do. But what you won't find here is a so-called killer robot, a fully autonomous weapon designed to hunt and kill without a human involved. As far as we know, they don't exist yet. But Canadian company ClearPath insists killer robots have no place on the battlefield.
We feel that there is a line which is being crossed with this technology. We feel that on top of being riskier than anyone actually appreciates right now, there is a disconnect there's an ethical and moral disconnect from war. We think that these weapon systems are going to be used in all sorts of dangerous ways, both by major powers and non-state actors alike.
The risks of, say, a machine killing the wrong person, of being hacked, of engaging with another machine and escalating a conflict are some of the reasons the company says it took a stand in 2014. It has committed to not knowingly, at least, create fully autonomous weapons. Thousands of scientists, engineers, tech companies and artificial intelligence experts have done the same. But they're not shunning military contracts completely. They say AI can be a valuable tool. The Pentagon just last month called on big tech companies to help develop its AI capabilities. Russia and China are already investing in military AI technology.
I think it really first comes down to the responsibility of every engineer and developer to ensure that the governments around the world are aware of the risks in the use of this technology, and that these decisions are being made in a rational, considered way. And then from there, perhaps they can start having conversations about if their company in particular, themselves in particular, should work on this technology.
Tech workers are demanding transparency as their bosses eye new and potentially lucrative defence contracts. Some of them have chosen to leave and work for companies like ClearPath. It all boils down to wanting to know what they're creating and whether it's technology that could kill or save lives. Mariarosaria, Al Jazeera.
And we can now bring in our panel. Joining us from London is Crosthwait. He's the co-founder of KENSAI. That's an artificial analysis consultancy company. And in Oxford on Skype, Mariarosaria Taddeo, research fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. And also in London, Toby Cadman, an international human rights lawyer and barrister at Guernica 37, an international law firm. Welcome to the program. I'm going to start with you, Ms. Taddeo, and ask you, why is there so much concern about these lethal automated weapons? Why has it come to this, where the United Nations is speaking, or there's a conversation about banning them?
Well, the conversation has been going on for a while. The use of autonomous systems in conflict or in battle on the battlefield is something that has been constantly evolving for the past 2 decades. At the moment, the discussion has gained much more momentum because we are at the point in which we start seeing AI developing quite fast and becoming very successful in its development. And there is a chance that states might want to start to use autonomous systems endowed with AI as weapon systems on the battlefield. The question is that those who support the deployment of these machines on the battlefield think that, well, it's going to help strategy, it's going to help saving life of the soldiers, of the army who's deploying these machines. But there is also a big important question to be addressed, which is whether machines should be left in charge of deciding whether to kill a human being or not, which is a fundamentally ethical question. It should never be the case that the human life is taken by a machine who has decided autonomously to go their way. And this question opens up, as you say, as people will say, a can of worms, because there are a lot of other issues having to do to the principle of human dignity, the right to life, but also specific ethical questions which have to do with just war theory, and is about the principle of distinction, proportionality, attribution of responsibility. So basically, we see a new development in technology which could facilitate war fighting, but might take war fighting to a much more unethical level that we have seen so far. And people are starting to have these discussions.
Okay, well, Crosthwait, how far are we from seeing machines being able to make decisions or target humans and kill them without human control behind them? Is this the direction we're heading?
Well, targeting human beings to kill them automatically is something that we are already seeing and already able to do. There's already automatic weapons like the Phalanx system on ships, which enables automatically to shoot down incoming missiles or threats to that ship, and that's been in deployment since the 1980s. So we're already seeing weapons which are being able to automatically operate themselves, albeit that that's done under the control of a human operator. So that human operator has to operate the machine, turn it on and switch it to automatic mode. So we're already seeing weapon systems like this that are already in deployment. What we're talking about here, or I think where the hype is around this, is that we're looking at weapon systems which are making the decision to kill. Now, that's a very different principle, and that's sort of giving autonomy to machines in the sense that they're making the thought process behind whether it's viable to kill a person or not. And I think that we're very far away from, decades, if not longer, because the machine intelligence is not really at that stage. Machine intelligence is being deployed into weapon systems in a smaller scale where it's being used in a very targeted way, whether it's target acquisition, whether that's using convolutional neural networks to visually identify targets, which is something that Project Maven sought to do with Google last year with the US government. But overarchingly, it's a different question between automatic machines that can kill and machines that can choose to kill. And that's something that should not be conflated, and something which I think we are at risk of conflating. And I think that that's the position of many governments around the world, that we conflate those two arguments between automatic weapons that are designed to target and the parameters are set by human beings on the one hand, and on the other hand, machines that are making the decision to kill off their own back.
Toby Cadman, let me bring you in on this. How far or how closely do the current regulations we have right now, the current principles of law, of armed conflict, in international humanitarian law, how equipped are they currently to deal with the issue of automated weapons or lethal automated weapons, where these machines or so-called robots are doing the killing, or perhaps even in the decision process of who should be targeted?
I think, as both speakers have already said, and the first speaker was referring to questions such as proportionality. There are obviously a number of legal principles when a military action is carried out. There are certain things that we need to look at as to whether it was a military target, whether the civilian casualties has been minimized, whether we can say it was proportional. So there are already existing rules as to determining whether a military campaign constitutes crime under international law. I think what's interesting is certainly the position that the United Kingdom has taken in the current debate, which is going on at the UN, is that they are not at the stage where there is no human element in the carrying out of an attack. So there is always going to be a level of responsibility. And I think, as with many things that we're looking at currently around the world, it's not a question of whether the law is not in step with technology. It's whether there is an effective accountability mechanism to enforce those laws. You know, we of course have various different jurisdictions there at the international and domestic level where individuals can be held accountable if we can say that it is not in accordance with international humanitarian law. The difficulty is holding those accountable for drone attacks as we move forward with less human control. But there's still going to be an element of holding individuals responsible. And as we've heard, we're far away from the stage where machines are actually making the decision to attack. But again, I still think that the law is sufficient to hold individuals accountable. We don't have the institutions necessarily, the jurisdiction to hold them accountable at all times.
Mr. Taddeo, so as we've heard there from both gentlemen, we are far away from machines actually making decisions on who to attack or target. The law currently is sufficient to deal with that. So why would you say you're so concerned?
Yeah, so the first point I wanted to make is that 5-10 years is not really so far away, especially when we're thinking about policies, governance, regulations. 5 years, 10 years is very much a short-term view, even if we want to accept that technology at the moment is not able to make a decision as to whether to kill or not a human being. So I'm concerned because 5-10 years might be just right, the amount of time, just the right amount of time to make proper regulations or proper policy in place. There are two more points I wanted to make. One is that the fact that machine can kill but cannot choose to kill currently doesn't make it less problematic. With landmines, we have this same kind of debate, and yet we ban them. Landmines don't decide whether to kill or not. They just kill because they can, the way they are designed. So we should also consider whether the current deployment of autonomous weapon systems or weapon systems which are remote controlled is something that is coherent with the fundamental principles that underpin international humanitarian law. Is it ethical for someone removed from the battle scene decide whether to kill or not? Does it respond to the principles of military ethics to engage in a combat operation without risking our own position when we are remote operating these machines? And in terms of the accountability and responsibility, yes and no, insofar as when we think about artificial systems, especially AI, we're thinking about technologies which are very much the outcome of integrated elements, each of which is fundamental for the system to carry out its task or operation. So ascribing responsibility in that context might be possible, but certain regulation might not be up to date with that context. So certainly we need institutions, as Toby, I believe, was mentioning. But I would like to stress one fundamental point, which is that current regulations, international humanitarian law, they are built upon human rights and just war theory, which are two sets of ethical principles and defining ethical values, which are meant to protect human lives, bloodshed, and ensure proportionality within a battle, within a war. And this system might be actually problematically applicable to the case of a battlefield in which some of the operations are run by machines. And we have to think about this now, because in 5 years' time, we might be unprepared if we don't do it now.
Okay, I'll give both the gentlemen time to respond to the points you made. But first, Will Crosthwait, one of the points that Mr. Taddeo had made was that there's a fear that increasingly autonomous drones, missile defense systems, and tanks could turn rogue in a cyber attack or malfunction. I mean, I'm expanding on it a little bit. How much basis is there really for this? Or is this the stuff of science fiction?
I mean, the idea that an enemy force is going to hack, military systems and stuff. I mean, is it possible? Yes, anything could be hacked if you've got the right smart people and you've got the access, et cetera, et cetera. Is it going to happen on a weapons grade system that's being deployed by a major government around the world? It's highly unlikely that they would deploy a weapons system which might end up being used against their own soldiers or civilians on the battlefield. I think that is the world of science fiction. Where I think that we are probably looking at more concerning developments within the drone space and weaponized drone space, or wider autonomous weapon systems, is it when it falls into the wrong hands, when commercially bought drones, commercially or domestically built explosives are attached to that drone, and then that is used in an atrocity by a terrorist organization. Now, will regulation against that in the UN prevent a terrorist organization from doing it? Well, no, it won't. And there are, as Toby pointed out, legal positions in place and legal institutions in place that will prevent governments, nation states, from using weapons in that way. And those are very sophisticated and long-lasting institutions that are built up over a long period of time. And while Mariarosaria said about the 5 to 10 year window of government, I think that we're still much further than that away from autonomous weapons system. And I think that the position that a lot of governments take who are trying to prevent this being banned is that it's actually too early for us to be trying to carte blanche ban AI in weapons or ban weapons which we aren't developed yet, which are quite far off and which we don't know what shape and form that they will take. Should we be preventing terrorists from getting their hands on this weaponry? Absolutely. Is it that government will be rogue, or will it be used by rogue elements? Will it be hijacked? I think that that's less of a risk. And I think that conflating the AI banning in weapons or killer robots, quote unquote, it compares to landmines. I think that that's actually not accurate, because landmines directly breach 2 of the 3 major principles on the laws of war, whereas it can indiscriminately target civilians, and additionally, not only can it indiscriminately target civilians, but it causes unnecessary and prolonged suffering of combatants if they lose limbs to landmines. What we're talking about with a lot of the solutions which artificial intelligence or killer robots might employ, it's actually much more targeted and actually potentially more accurate than a human operator in this position. The other thing is that all military forces around the world operate under command and control, where the commanders order the units to execute a mission or execute a kill. And I don't think that politicians or military around the world are going to want to lose that command and control to machines who they deign with autonomous decision making, in the same way that we deploy soldiers to warfare and battlefields, yet we don't give them the decision to autonomously kill unarmed civilians or anything like that.
Ms. Taddeo, you seem to want to respond?
Yes, indeed. The first point, so I didn't mention any sci-fi scenario. This is sci-fi, and AI is one of the things that is farthest for the research I do. So no sci-fi scenario at all. I mean, the 5-10 years timeline was the one that was mentioned to me as the beginning of this interview as a possible timeline in which AI might be deployed autonomously in the battlefield. So it didn't come from me. The second point is that when it comes to the autonomy of weapon system on the battlefield, where RP Israel systems already deployed. There is an autonomous robot system patrolling the border between North and South Korea, which is unarmed patrol systems, and so on and so forth. So it's not that we are talking about something that technology is not yet ready to deploy. We are talking about something that could be deployed in a more sophisticated way, in a more pervasive way, in a more aggressive way. So we should keep this in mind. I'm all in favor of not talking about AI applications in terms of science fiction, but I'm also very much concerned when we're trying to label as science fiction scenarios which are realistically forthcoming or foreseeable, because this means that we're going to be caught unprepared when they become real. The point to the landmine, that was a point that I made in response to the idea that at the moment we have machines that can kill, but that don't decide to kill. and landmine are machines which can kill but don't decide to kill. So the analogy stands only on those grounds. All are in agreement the fact that landmines are illegal and should not be deployed. But if if Will agrees with that, then more to the point that even autonomous machines used as weapon systems should not be deployed. And on the same point, the fact that states won't relinquish the control over the machine, well, that makes it even more clear that we shouldn't deploy these kinds of machines, exactly for the reasons that Will was stressing, because states will be wanting to maintain control, because losing control is very risky and dangerous. So all to the same points. I also would like to stress one thing that perhaps might be coming relevant later, but when we think about the ban of autonomous weapon systems, we should be carefully shaping what we want to ban, because banning the technology is really not the right path to go through. Many of these systems will be relying on technologies which are developed also for good purposes. Image recognition is relevant in medical diagnosis, as it will be, for example, in armed drones, and so on, many other kinds of technologies. What we need to regulate is the deployment and the use of these machines. We have to understand as societies what we find.
And on that note, let me try and bring Toby Cadman in to talk about what kind of a regulatory framework you can have for this. How do you decide what it is you're banning or what it is you're trying to constrict? And then also, let's take a look at the countries involved, particularly when it's being done under the banner of the United Nations, where you have China, Russia, countries that do not necessarily follow the guidelines set by the United Nations. So how do you contain this arms race that is currently happening within the artificial intelligence realm?
Well, it's very difficult to regulate an area of law on what technology may be in 10 or 15 years. What you have to have is an effective legal framework that is enforceable for what are the capabilities now. And as Will has quite rightly said, and it goes back to what the UK has also said in relation to this. The UK, as other countries, they're not seeking to suggest they have that technology, or they're seeking to develop that technology at the current stage. I think the concept of having entirely AI controlled weapon systems is, of course, fundamentally wrong, because there has to be a level of oversight and a level of accountability. But you're still going to have, regardless of how quickly the technology advances, you're still going to have a state or an entity that is responsible for using that system. And if that system commits what is considered to be a crime, then of course there is going to be a level of accountability. So I think what we need to be clear on is that the law can only regulate what is possible now. Your point as to the UN system and whether states are going to follow that, well, you quite rightly say you've only got to look at the membership of the UN Human Rights Council to start with to show that international accountability and human rights protection is not really at the forefront of the agenda. You also got to take into account that there is a UN Special Rapporteur that has dealt with and continues to deal with the question of drone attacks. That is not an enforcement mechanism. So I think it's whatever principles, whatever regulations the United Nations draws up, how are they actually going to be enforced, and how is there going to be accountability for those states that violate those rules, that commit what are international crimes. And as Will has said, we're talking about states, we're not talking about terrorist groups and those that hijack this technology and use it. It's going to be very difficult to regulate that.
Thank you very much to all our speakers on today's panel. We have run out of time, but this has been a very interesting conversation, and obviously one that needs to continue. But I'd like to thank all our guests, Will Crosthwait, Mariarosaria Taddeo, and Toby Cadman. And thank you too for watching. You can see this program again anytime by visiting our website. You'll find that at aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, why don't you go to our Facebook page? You'll find that at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And of course, you can always join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. And for me, Divya Gopalan, and the team, it's bye for now. It's been good to have you here.